The photograph was small enough to lose between the pages of an old book, yet heavy enough to silence the room the moment it was found. A boy of no more than 9 stands beside his mother, their wool coats stiff with winter and their smiles thin, as though forced by the photographer's impatience. Snow dusts their boots. Behind them, the woods stretch into a darkness that the lens, even in daylight, seems reluctant to touch. At first glance, nothing about the image is unusual. The boy's hair is parted neatly. His mother holds one gloved hand on his shoulder. But the eyes, those pale, glassy eyes, pull you in. When the photograph is brought close, when the details sharpen and the grain begins to breathe, something else takes shape in the reflection on the boy's pupils. Something standing far behind them, tall enough that its head nearly brushes the treetops. It is difficult to tell whether it is a man or the suggestion of one, a silhouette wrapped in the same winter haze as the trees. But its posture is unmistakable, leaning forward, as if watching or waiting. The air around the photograph seems colder the longer it is held. And although the picture was taken in 1933, in a clearing that no longer exists, the forest captured in the background feels alive, still growing, still listening, still sheltering whatever stood there that day. Whatever was patient enough to be caught in a child's eyes. The photograph resurfacing begins with an almost accidental discovery, the kind that happens when 2 unrelated paths cross for reasons that never feel random in hindsight. In a dusty corner of an antique shop that smells faintly of cedar and damp paper, an unassuming box sits wedged between a stack of brittle magazines and a tarnished brass lamp. The box is unmarked, save for a strip of yellowed tape stretched loosely across the lid. No one remembers where it came from. The shopkeeper insists it has been there for years, though he cannot recall ever buying it or placing it on the shelf. Inside it lies a scattered assortment of forgotten mementos, postcards with half-written messages, a broken pocket watch missing its glass face, a cracked photograph frame that still holds grains of sand in its corners. And among these remnants, almost hidden, lies a small sepia photograph curled gently at the edges, as if trying to fold in on itself. The photograph draws the eye immediately, not because it is dramatic or ornate, but because it captures something hauntingly still. A boy stands in a clearing, his posture stiff as though commanded to hold it. His mother stands beside him, her expression composed yet distant, her hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder. Their coats are thick and dark, suggesting winter or the edge of one. The background is a tangle of bare trees drained of warmth, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The image has been preserved well despite its age, though flecks of time scratch faint scars across its surface. The person who finds the photograph does not know why they pick it up, only that they feel compelled to turn it over, expecting perhaps a name or a year. And there, written in a thin fading script, is the date, February 1933. No names, no location, only that cold fragment of time. The date alone stirs a curiosity, but it is the boy's eyes that trap it. Even at a casual glance, there is something peculiar about them, a brightness that does not match the muted tones of the photograph. They carry a reflective gleam, as though the boy is staring not at the camera but at something beyond it, something behind the person taking the picture. The more the finder looks, the more the photograph seems to pull at them, as if holding a secret it wants someone, anyone, to notice. The moment the photograph is examined more closely, the strangeness in the boy's eyes stops being a vague impression and becomes something that cannot be rationalized. The finder brings the picture toward a lamp, letting the light fall across the glossy surface. The boy's pupils catch the glow in an oddly sharp way, far clearer than the rest of the image should allow for a photograph taken in 1933. What at first seems like nothing more than the natural glint of reflected light begins to form the faint outline of a shape, a silhouette so subtle it would be easy to dismiss if not for the way it remains consistent no matter how the angle changes. Curiosity soon overrides hesitation, and the finder reaches for a magnifying glass kept on the counter. With the photograph placed beneath its lens, the boy's eyes expand into view, the details growing sharper with each careful adjustment. The moment the focus aligns, the breath catches. There is something in the reflection, something undeniably present, impossibly tall, standing far behind the boy and his mother. Its shape is crooked, as though its limbs are slightly bent or distorted by movement the camera froze at the wrong instant. It lacks the clarity of a human figure, yet it is unmistakably upright and facing them. The discovery sends a quiet shiver along the skin. One would expect to see the photographer reflected, perhaps a man holding an old box camera, but the silhouette reveals no camera, no equipment, no human proportions. Instead, it appears elongated, too narrow at the shoulders, its head tapering into a slight curve that suggests no recognizable feature. It stands apart from the trees, yet its edges blur into the vertical lines of the trunks, almost as if it is camouflaged within them. The reflection reveals just enough to confirm that something stood there, but not enough to understand what it was. What deepens the unease is the realization that neither the boy nor the mother seem aware of the presence behind them. Their expressions hold no trace of alarm. The mother's gaze is pointed toward the photographer, calm and composed, while the boy's eyes, though devoid of fear, capture the only evidence of the figure. It is as if his eyes alone perceived it, and the camera, by some accident of light and angle, preserved what he saw. The finder lowers the magnifying glass, heart unsettled by the truth that the photograph managed to hold. Something was in those woods the day the picture was taken, something that should not have been there, yet was close enough to be mirrored in a child's unblinking stare. The deeper the photograph is studied, the more its background begins to breathe with details that weren't immediately noticeable. At first glance, the trees appear as any winter forest might, tall, leafless, unmoving. Their trunks form a tight, desolate wall behind the boy and his mother. But when the finder looks at the image for longer than a casual moment, something subtle begins to emerge in the arrangement of those trees, a faint pattern that differentiates itself from the rest of the forest's chaos. There is a thin, shadowed line cutting through the background, narrow enough to miss on the first or even the second look, yet undeniably present, like a crease pressed into the woods. It appears to run between two unusually close trees, bending slightly left before disappearing into the blur of deeper forest. What makes this detail unsettling is how deliberate it feels. Nature rarely forms such a clean pathway through densely packed woods, especially in a photograph taken during winter, when fallen branches and snow should clutter the forest floor. This thin passageway looks cleared, as though footsteps once passed through it repeatedly, tamping the earth down. When the finder compares this part of the image to the rest, the difference is stark. The trail possesses a faint, unnatural neatness, like something carved rather than naturally formed. And yet, no part of the photograph suggests recent human activity, no footprints, no tools, no signs of lumber or hunting. The finder leans closer, letting the light skim across the surface. The edges of the trail become more defined, revealing what might be the hint of an old fence post leaning brokenly against one of the trees. Its wood is splintered, darkened by age, nearly swallowed by decades of decay. It stands as the only man-made object in an otherwise untouched scene. This single remnant deepens the mystery, suggesting the trail once led somewhere with purpose. But where that destination might have been is impossible to tell from the photograph alone. What is most perplexing is that this trail does not appear on any modern map of the area where the photograph is believed to have been taken. The woods in the region have since been charted, developed, and partially cleared, leaving no official record of such a path ever existing. Yet the photograph captures it as plainly as the figures standing in front. As the finder traces the faint line with their finger, they feel a strange tug of intuition, as though the image is offering a clue that was never meant to be noticed. The trail, almost erased by time, seems to beckon from the past, hinting that something once traveled it, something that retreated into the trees long before the shutter clicked. As the finder begins asking questions about the photograph's origins, the townspeople respond with a cautiousness that feels older than the town itself. Their reactions are subtle at first, a stiffening of posture, a fleeting glance toward the tree line outside, an abrupt change of subject, but the pattern becomes too consistent to ignore. When asked about the woods from the photograph's era, the older residents hesitate, as though rummaging through memories they would rather leave untouched. Some claim they do not remember anything unusual about those forests in 1933. Others insist they were warned as children never to wander too far into them, though they cannot recall exactly who warned them or why. It is only at the very edge of conversation, in the moments when a person believes no one is listening, that fragments of old stories slip through. A woman sweeping the porch mentions that the woods used to have a name nobody says anymore. A man at the local diner lowers his voice and mutters that hunters once returned from those trees empty-handed and pale, saying they felt watched from between the pines. An elderly resident, nearly deaf and often ignored, whispers that there was something in the forest that didn't care for being seen, though he cannot describe what it looked like. Their words lack coherence, but not sincerity. Something in their tone carries an unspoken weight, a shared memory more felt than spoken. The finder notices how each reference to the woods seems to drain the color from the speaker's face. There is no exaggeration in their voices, no dramatic flair, only a quiet tension, as if the stories are being told against an instinct to remain silent. These half-remembered accounts never align perfectly, some speak of a presence, others of strange lights between the trees, others still of voices heard at dusk calling from places no one could stand. Yet the inconsistencies make the stories more unsettling, not less. It suggests that whatever once haunted the woods manifested differently to different people, or perhaps that each person can only recall the pieces their mind allowed them to keep. In the evenings, as the finder walks past the forest's edge, the trees seem unnaturally still, as if listening. Even the birds fall quiet near the older groves, creating a pocket of silence so complete it feels intentional. And though the forest has been logged, replanted, and reshaped over the decades, the locals insist it never lost that uneasy stillness. They speak of it with the wary acceptance of people who have learned to coexist with something they do not understand. The more the finder listens, the clearer it becomes that the woods were once feared for reasons the town buried long ago, reasons that no one wants to resurrect, even in memory. The discovery of the boy's diary happens almost by accident, much like the photograph itself. After days of trying to trace the identities of the mother and child, the finder visits the town's historical society, a cramped and dusty building kept alive by a handful of aging volunteers. Most of the documents stored there are brittle newspapers, tax records, and yellowed birth certificates, but tucked inside a cardboard box mislabeled as miscellaneous school materials lies a small leather-bound book. Its cover is cracked and softened by time, and the initials on the front, FH, match the faint signature found on the back of the photograph's frame. The diary is remarkably well preserved, its pages filled with tight, careful handwriting that shifts subtly as the entries move from winter into spring. At first, the diary seems perfectly ordinary. The boy writes about the cold, his lessons, and the chores he completes each morning. He mentions his mother often, noting how she worries when he lingers outside after dusk. But as the pages progress, small notes of unease begin to appear, tucked between more innocent observations. He writes that some nights he wakes to the sound of crunching leaves, though no wind blows. On another page, he describes a feeling of being watched while gathering firewood, a sensation so strong he ran home without it, earning a scolding he does not detail. The entries grow stranger in February, the same month stamped on the photograph. The boy describes seeing a long shape between the trees that disappeared when he blinked. He writes about an itch at the back of his neck whenever he walks near the old trail behind their house, the very trail the photograph revealed. His mother tells him the trail is abandoned and unsafe, that it leads nowhere. But the boy insists he hears footsteps on it at night, slow and deliberate, as though someone is pacing just out of sight. The most unsettling entry is dated 3 days before the photograph was taken. In it, the boy describes the man with no face, though he admits he cannot be certain it was a man. He says the figure stood among the trees at twilight, not moving, not speaking, only watching him. He tries to draw it in the margin, but the sketch is little more than a tall, tapering silhouette with no features. He writes that he tried to tell his mother, but she became angry and told him never to mention it again. The final line of that entry reads, "He knows I saw him. He followed me all the way home." The disturbances begin so subtly that the finder initially attributes them to stress, the kind that settles in after too many late nights spent scrutinizing old photographs and deciphering a child's trembling handwriting. It starts with a soft sound at the window, a faint tapping that could easily be a branch stirred by the wind. But when the finder looks outside, the trees are still, frozen in the quiet hush of the night. The tapping stops the moment the curtain is pulled aside, as though whatever caused it did not wish to be seen. The next day brings a new unease. Small scratches appear on the window's outer frame, thin and clustered, too high for any animal and too deliberate for weathering. They look almost like fingernail marks dragged lightly but purposefully across the wood. As the photograph and diary occupy more of the finder's thoughts, the disturbances escalate. Footsteps begin to echo faintly beneath the floorboards at night, measured and slow, as though someone is pacing directly below the house. The building has no basement, only a crawl space too narrow for a person to enter, yet the sounds persist, steady and unmistakable. The finder tries to ignore them, telling themselves it must be an animal, until the footsteps pause whenever they hold their breath to listen. The timing feels intentional, as though the source of the sound is listening back. During the day, the forest near the edge of town begins to feel hostile in ways that cannot be articulated. The trees seem to lean inward as the finder walks past, their branches arching like ribs around a darkened heart. Birds that once flitted among the branches now avoid the older sections completely, leaving long stretches of trail devoid of any natural sound. Even the air shifts strangely, losing warmth in sudden pockets that make the skin tighten and the breath mist as though winter has returned in scattered fragments. The most troubling moment comes one afternoon when the finder spots something through the trees, a brief flicker of movement, tall and narrow, disappearing behind a trunk with unnatural smoothness. It happens too quickly to confirm, yet lingers in the mind with the same uneasy certainty as the figure reflected in the boy's eyes. That night, the tapping returns, louder, more insistent, progressing from the window to the front door before fading away. Objects inside the house begin to shift slightly from where they were left, though the finder lives alone. A chair angled toward a window. A curtain drawn back. The diary lying open to the entry about the faceless man, though it had been closed earlier. These small intrusions weave themselves together into a truth the finder tries desperately not to accept. Whatever stood behind the boy and his mother in 1933 has noticed their attention. And something in the present has begun to stir in response, as though awakened by the act of remembering. The final clue presents itself not through determination but through exhaustion, arriving on a night when the finder has nearly convinced themselves to abandon the investigation entirely. Sleep eludes them, chased away by the growing sense that each shadow around the room has begun to lean closer. Seeking distraction, they spread the photograph, the diary, and several old maps across the kitchen table, hoping that organizing the evidence might bring a sliver of clarity. Instead, it brings something far stranger. While comparing the faint trail visible in the photograph with an outdated map drawn decades after 1933, the finder notices a discrepancy. An unnamed footpath appears on the older map, barely sketched in, leading into a part of the forest marked with nothing more than a hand-drawn X. No modern survey includes it. No local speaks of it. Yet there it is, a ghost of a trail matching the one in the photograph almost perfectly. Compelled, the finder overlays a transparency of the photo onto the map, aligning the trees, the clearing, the faint curvature of land. The match is undeniable. The old trail once led deeper than anyone now acknowledges, to a place that time, fear, or both have erased from every newer document. The X sits at the point where the boy claimed he saw the faceless man. The realization settles on the finder like a weight, one that feels both ominous and expectant. It is as though the photograph has been waiting for someone to decipher this alignment, to notice the path that was never supposed to be remembered. The air in the room shifts subtly, cooler, thicker, as the finder traces the route on the map with their fingertip. The house creaks, not with the random groans of settling wood, but with a slow, deliberate cadence, as though something is moving along the outside wall. The tapping does not begin this time. Instead, there is a long, dragging sound, like fingers trailing across the siding. The finder freezes, listening, heart pounding in a rhythm that seems too loud against the sudden hush. It becomes impossible to ignore the truth forming in their mind, that the disturbances have been guiding them, not warning them away. Each scratch, each footstep, each flicker in the trees has been nudging them toward a single, unavoidable direction. Their gaze returns to the map. The X sits waiting, the trail a thin thread leading straight into the heart of the oldest part of the woods. And somewhere deep inside, the finder feels a pull, not of curiosity, but of recognition, as if something out there has been calling them specifically, patiently, for far longer than they realized. The woods, silent and watching, seem to hold their breath for the moment when the finder finally steps toward the path that was never meant to be forgotten.